Welcome to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast series with U.S. Navy Special Operations veteran, CEO, and hockey fanatic Bob Pizzini. Bob discusses leadership, success, failure, defining moments, and hard lessons learned with guests who are intentional in their approach to leadership. Leadership is a perishable skill. Use it or lose it. In this series, entrepreneurs, industry executives, academics, public figures, and other highly effective professionals share their formulas for success with you.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Elevate Your Leadership podcast with me, your host, Bob Pizzini. Hopefully, you've listened on the various audio platforms or watched via my YouTube channel, also called Elevate Your Leadership, to previous episodes of the discussions that I have with leaders. I have discussions with people who have brought great value to me and my organization, and by you listening to our discussion, they will bring great value to you personally and professionally regarding any organization or group that you're associated with. Today's guest is exceptional, to say the least. I have Dr. Ronny Jackson on the show. Dr. Jackson is also the Congressman from the 13th Congressional District of the state of Texas. I'm going to read Dr. Jackson's bio, and then we're going to have a fascinating discussion. Dr. Ronny Jackson was raised in Levelland, Texas, where he learned the value of family, faith, and hard work. After working as a roustabout, you're going to have to tell us what a roustabout is, Ronny, in the West Texas oil fields, he paid his way through undergraduate school at Texas A&M University. Following graduation from medical school at the University of Texas Medical Branch, he began active duty service in the United States Navy. With unique training in undersea medicine, Hoo-yah Deep Sea, that's where I first met Ronny. We were both instructors at Navy Dive School, Panama City, Florida. He utilized his talents while assigned to locations ranging from Panama City, Florida, to Sigonella, Italy, and that was my previous duty station at EOD Mobile Unit 8 in Sigonella, Sicily. Dr. Jackson would later complete his residency in emergency medicine, finishing at the top of his class. Soon thereafter, he deployed to Iraq to lead resuscitative medicine efforts on the battlefield for a combat surgical shock trauma platoon. And I know he saw the worst of what war does to people during that deployment. While serving in Iraq, he was called back to the States to serve in the White House Medical Unit during President George W. Bush's administration. Dr. Jackson ultimately led the White House Medical Unit as director of the White House Medical Unit and physician to the president during the Obama administration. In December 2014, he ended his duties as director and continued being physician to the president. He was also physician to the president under the Trump administration, and in January 2019, President Donald J. Trump appointed him as chief medical advisor and assistant to the president. In December 2019, after 25 years of distinguished service to his country, Dr. Jackson retired from the United States Navy as a Rear Admiral. He returned to the great state of Texas and ran for U.S. Congress. Dr. Jackson was elected to serve Texas' 13th Congressional District in November of 2020. His committee assignments include the House Agriculture Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Jackson is happily married to his wife of 30 years, Jane. The couple has 3 children. Their oldest, Libby, holds an MBA from Mount St. Mary's University and works in the national security sector. Very cool. Their middle child, Ben, is a Navy officer and proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. Awesome. Their youngest, Matthew, is a sophomore at West Texas A&M University, and Matthew is actually behind the scenes in studio here with us today. Wow. Dr. Ronny Jackson, Doc Jackson, as we referred to you when we were instructors at dive school, and Congressman Jackson, welcome so much to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast.
Hey, thanks, Robert. Appreciate you having me.
Reading your intro, impressive career, to say the least, all the things you've done, everything you've done with energy, with vigor, with conviction and compassion. It's obvious. Just talking to you and just knowing you, it's obvious. And I remember that first time we met in, I think in 95 or 96, maybe 90. No, it was probably 96, 97, something like that.
That's about right.
In Italy, you were a very young, energetic diving medical officer at the time. First question. Reading your bio, you were a roustabout. What is a roustabout?
So roustabouts out in the oil field, like a roughneck is the guy that works on the drilling rig. The roustabouts are best described kind of as oil field, maintenance guys. So you're not actually drilling on the drilling rigs, but you're actually running around all over the oil field, digging up busted, busted pipelines. You're, greasing pump jacks. You're working on water injection wells. You're, servicing tank batteries. So all the other stuff that's around out on the oil field, that's your job is to maintain all that. So it's like an oil field maintenance guy.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
and dirty, nasty work. It's super cold in the winter and it's super hot in the summer. But it's a good job.
All right. So roustabout, dirty, nasty job. And how old were you when you did that?
I started off when I was probably 18 years old, 18, 19, into college, or into high school, beginning of college.
Okay.
That's how I paid for college. So,
Okay.
my mom and dad, my dad was an electrician and my mom was a homemaker. My dad actually ended up working later on as a pumper in the oil field. But, they didn't have any money to put me through college.
Yeah.
So I had to pay for that myself. So, you can go and you can do a lot of other things. I worked also sacked groceries and stocked groceries at a grocery store from the time I was 13 till I was probably like 18 or 19. But working on the oil field is a much better paying job. So you can, work the same number of hours and make a lot more money. So it was the job I needed to get me through school.
Okay. Was that your first job in your childhood, was bagging groceries?
No, the first job I ever had, I worked at a movie theater, in the concession of movie theater when I was 13.
No kidding.
I had that job. And I actually had a pretty high level of responsibility. Looking back now, it's kind of crazy, but I opened the store, the movie theater up at times, and I closed it down. I counted all the cash in the till and, got it to the person that needed to deposit in the bank. I mean, I had a lot of responsibility as a 13-year-old looking back.
No kidding. That's pretty cool. So mine was, I worked at a dive shop in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Yeah. And I was probably 14 or 15, but I was opening the store and, responsible for the till and all that. So, and we have something very common there that we're going to get to in a second, but let's go back even further. So you grew up at Llewellyn, is it Llewellyn, Texas? Levelland, Texas.
Flat, level land. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. And so your childhood, you talked about your parents. What was school like? Did you play sports?
I played sports up until probably around the 9th grade or so. But, like I said, I didn't come from a family with a lot of money. So in about the 9th grade or so, when I got a driver's license, I had a choice. I could either go to football practice or I could go to work at the grocery store as soon as school was over and have a car. So really it was a choice between having a vehicle or not. So I chose to stop playing sports, stop playing football. And when school was over at 3:30, I was at the grocery store at 4 p.m. and I worked till 11 o'clock at night. And I worked 30 to 40 hours a week all throughout my entire high school career.
Wow. Yeah, so again, your work ethic is demonstrated throughout your professional life. Clearly, the seeds were planted when you were a young man. Again, similar with me, I faded away from sports around 9th grade, 10th grade, something like that. And same thing, I had a job, and I loved diving. I was a scuba diver as a young kid, and so were you. And why don't you tell us about that? Yeah,
so that's really odd because it kind of changed my entire trajectory of my life, right? But there's no water where I grew up at all. There's no top water at all. I mean, it's dry, it's flat. So there aren't even any lakes around where I'm at. But there was a highway patrol officer who was teaching a PADI dive class on his time off at the local community college. So when I was 15 years old, me and one of my best friends took that class and, became PADI basic divers. And then we took the advanced class and the rescue diver, so on and so forth. And we really got into the diving side of it, So we were running around, like in other places in Texas, like Balmorhea and places like that. We were going and diving Spring-fed lakes in New Mexico. And that's really the only diving experience I had was diving these little spring-fed lakes.
Cold water, the springs.
Yeah. But we did that, and I just fell in love with diving. And then I got, one day we were watching TV, and I was at the time, I want to say I was 18 or 19. I think I was 19 at the time. I just turned 19. And we're watching a commercial about Australia, and they were talking. And we just started joking around a little bit about how we should go over there and dive. And they just got more and more serious. And so the two of us basically, I dropped out of college for a semester, worked as much as I could out in the oil field, and then also I was working some at the grocery store too. I was doing everything I could. We both saved up about $5,000 each, and we just got on a flight, and it was a great deal. I was 19, I think he was 21, so I got to fly as a child for half price with him. So it worked out pretty well. We flew over there, and we were just backpackers. And the first place we went to was Cairns, and there's a place called South Pacific Divers in Cairns. So we went out there, and we took a PADI dive master course to become dive masters. We're already rescue divers, right? So we went out. It was a liveaboard. So we went out on this liveaboard for like a week and did this dive master course. It was probably 2 weeks that we spent doing the course. We got certified as PADI dive masters, and then we weren't there on work visas. We were just there on travel visas, backpacking. But the guy was like, "Hey, you guys want to work as dive masters on board the boat?" And we're like, "Sure." So we worked as dive masters on the boat for the rest of the summer, and they just gave us a place. I stayed on that liveaboard.
Out on the Great Barrier Reef?
Yes, yeah. It's a liveaboard. So we'd go out early Monday morning, like, before the sun come up, and we'd go way out into the Coral Sea out on the Great Barrier Reef, and we'd just stay out there until Friday evening. We'd come back, and the skipper would move the boat around to a different location, and we'd dive all these different reefs. And my only job was basically to, take the divers down, show them around, run their tables, jam their tanks, drink a few beers with them.
Yeah.
So when you're not, that's pretty much a perfect job.
What a dream job. No, that is a total dream job. So so when I was a kid, I worked for the dive shop, and we did Florida trips. And it's kind of the same thing, not the Great Barrier Reef. And we'd go to John Pennekamp State Park. We'd go to Crystal River, Tuckney River, and down to Key Largo. But same thing. But it is ideal. What a dream job. So I noticed early on I picked up on your Australian accent. So
that's right. Exactly.
So that's a lot of fun. So what happened after Australia?
Well, I came back, and when I was in college, I'd done one semester, then I sit out a semester to save money to go over there. But the first semester, I was an engineering major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Right, engineering wasn't for me at all. I couldn't do the engineering graphics where you have to visualize things three-dimensionally and draw them. I don't have that. I can't do that.
I'm just going to be a doctor instead.
Yeah. So what happened is I got over there, and I got interested in, I wanted to be a marine biologist. When I came back, I was like, I think I want to be a marine biologist. So I went back to the junior college I was going to school at, changed my major to biology. Just got my associate's degree in biology there, and then I transferred to Texas A&M at Galveston into the marine biology program, where I eventually got a degree in marine biology a couple years later. So I did a couple years at junior college and a couple years at Texas A&M University. Actually, I did 3 years at Texas A&M University in Galveston, because the first year I was in the Corps, and I was also training simultaneously to be a third mate on a ship, or else to be a junior officer in the Navy. So I was doing a lot of seamanship and celestial navigation, terrestrial navigation, all these kinds of classes to get caught up with the people that had already been there for 2 years.
Okay.
I came in as a transfer student.
Okay.
But it was a great experience. I got a lot of good, unique training. Finished that, and then while I was there, I, and once again, I was still paying for my own education, every penny of it. So I would go home on spring break, Christmas break, summer break. If I had more than 3 or 4 days off, I was back home in the oil field, working as much as I could to get money for books, tuition, and fees for the next semester. I also had a job on campus all the time. I was an RA on campus, and I ran like a chemistry lab when I was on campus as well to make extra money. So I worked pretty hard to get myself through school. But I decided that I met my wife. She came in. That's where we met. It was at Texas A&M Galveston. There, she came in, and I decided I needed a little bit more money to entertain her. So I actually was going to see if I could find a little bit better job when I wasn't in class. So I went across the street to the University of Texas Medical Branch. It's the largest medical school, in Texas. It's the original one of the oldest, and it's the main one in the University of Texas medical system. So I went over there and was looking for a way to make a little extra money. So I said, "Hey, do you guys have anything I can do over here?" And they said, "Well, look, we have some work study programs, and the med students aren't taking advantage of it. We can find something for you to do." So they called me back a few days later, and they said, "Hey, we found you a job, and you're going to be working in the pathology department as an autopsy assistant."
Wow.
I was like, "What?"
Wow. So, as a marine biologist.
Yeah, as a marine biologist, right? So I said, "All right, I'll do whatever." And so I started doing that, and I would do part of the autopsies. I'd help them open the body up, take all the organs out, pass all the organs to the end of the table where the pathology residents would dissect everything out and try to figure out why the person died. And I'd take the skull off and take the brain out, and I did all this stuff.
Wow.
And the residents started teaching me, so they started going like, "Hey man, you remember that liver you took out yesterday?" I was like, "Yeah." They go, "Come look at this one. This guy's got liver cancer. See the difference?" And so I started getting interested. I started getting interested in medicine. So I thought to myself, you know what? I think I might want to be a doctor. I knew I didn't want to be a pathologist. I'd been also a volunteer firefighter, and I'd worked around paramedics and EMTs, and I pretty much knew I either wanted to be a trauma surgeon or emergency medicine physician. So I slowly got more and more interested in med school, but I realized that there was no way I could pay for med school, right? I mean, going to work in the oil field is one thing to pay for undergrad, but paying for med school is a much bigger haul. So I started looking around, and I'd been in the Corps of Cadets my first year in Texas A&M there, and I thought, well, I'm going to reach out to the military and see if they have a program, where I can, maybe get into med school via that. They told me they didn't. They do actually, but the recruiter, I guess it wasn't what he was selling. He told me that there was no military medical school. There's one in Bethesda, but he told me there wasn't one. But he said, look, if you get into med school somewhere, he said, we have a scholarship program you can apply for, and if you get the scholarship, we'll pay for it. So I said, okay. So I remembered that. So I took the MCAT kind of hastily, did that. And then I applied for med schools. I only applied for in-state schools in Texas because I figured, I couldn't afford to go out of state if I was paying for it by myself, which I was assuming at the time was most likely going to be the case. But I got into med school at UTMB, at University of Texas Medical Branch there, which is my number one choice because obviously that's where my future wife was and that's where I was living. And so I got in there, and then I remembered that conversation. I called the Navy recruiter back, and I said, yep. So I filled out I applied for the scholarship program. I got the scholarship program, and then the Navy paid for all 4 years of my med school, my books, tuition, fees. They gave me a stipend to live on.
Does that exist today? Do you know?
It still exists.
That's awesome.
It's a fantastic program because, most people get out of med school and they owe, over $200,000 in debt. I got out of med school and I actually had a little bit of money in the bank because I wasn't even spending everything they were giving me for my stipend, right? So it was an awesome program, and you just owe year for year. So I did 4 years of med school, and I owed them 4 years of payback, right? So I thought, well, I'm going to do my 4 years payback, and I'm going to get straight out. I'm going to go back to.
Same with me. I'm going to do 4 years, and then I'm out.
And I was going to go back to Texas, be a rich emergency medicine doc, in the whole 90 yards. But then you know what happened? Same thing happened to you. You got in, and it was a lot more exciting, a lot more fun than I thought it would be. I got in, and they sent me straight to Naval Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia, as an intern. And I knew I wanted to do emergency medicine, so I did a transitional internship, which is a little bit of everything. But you have to do that 1 year of internship to get to pass the final part of your medical boards, right? So everybody does. So I did that internship, and then while I was there at Portsmouth, I found out about this program they had called the Diving Medical Officer Program. I'd never heard of it before, right? And they're like, you can be a diver and a doctor. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's tailor-made for me, right? So I applied for the DMO job for the Diving Medical Officer billet. I got it. They sent me straight to Panama City for 6 months. Put me completely through Navy dive school. I dove Mark 16, 21, Mark 20, scuba, R5. Everything, right? Yeah. I taught most of that too. I taught those classes because what happened is I finished there, and when I graduated, I wanted a diving billet, not a billet on a submarine, because some of those people that graduate from class could become submarine medical officers, UMOs. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay with the Navy diving community. There were no diving billets available when I got out. The only technically diving billet that was there was an instructor at the dive school in Panama City. So I took that job. So I graduated from dive school and went straight back there as an instructor the next day, and taught at the dive school for a couple years, and then took the first available real diving medical officer job that was out there with a real
a real unit.
Yeah. Which was Mobile Unit 8.
Yeah,
where you were. So
yeah, I remember when that happened.
Went to Sicily and did all kinds of cool stuff. Went to jump school in between, and that's how I ended up staying. I was going to do my 4 years and get out, but I was jumping out of airplanes, fast dropping out of helicopters, locking out of submarines with the SEALs, blowing stuff up, shooting all kinds of weapons. It was like being 15 and getting a paycheck. It was awesome, right? So my
Very true.
Years came, my 4 years went, and never even thought about getting out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So without a doubt, same thing. I just wanted to be a Navy diver. I had found this book on my high school library bookshelf called Navy Diver. I was already a scuba diver. I was enamored with all things underwater. Grew up watching the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Yeah. So all that cool stuff. Just for the listeners, I just want to explain a couple things that Doc Jackson mentioned. And sorry, I hope you don't mind me calling you Doc Jackson. That's just. But he mentioned Mark 16. He mentioned all the diving rigs that he dove, and the Navy has a variety of diving rigs. So I'm just going to review those real quick. Mark 16, underwater breathing apparatus, is primarily what Navy EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, uses to dive on underwater explosives. It's a non-magnetic, non-noise-making underwater breathing apparatus. And then Mark 21 is, I think it's something else now, but that's the surface-supplied hard hat that U.S. Navy deep-sea salvage divers wear. Scuba, everybody knows what scuba is. And you mentioned Mark 20, I think. Yeah. Mark 20 is a full-face mask, surface-supplied, but it's a very lightweight, swimmer-oriented diving apparatus. And LAR-5 too. LAR-5, you go ahead and explain that one.
Yeah, LAR-5 is the rig that the SEALs use. It's a rebreather as well, but not it's not a low acoustic and low magnetic like the Mark 16 that EOD uses. Yeah, they swim up on bombs and they have to be careful.
Yeah, it's a shallow water rebreather, and the Marine combat diver was there, and they use it as well. So. Right. So that's cool. So I remember the day, Chief Pizzini, your presence is requested in the medical department, right? We're at the dive school. We're both instructors down there. So I go up there, and you were there, and you're like, hey, Chief, didn't you just come from Italy? And I was like, yeah. And you were a young, energetic guy. Well, you're still energetic, but you know how we are when you were probably late 20s at the time.
Yeah.
So, and you're like, hey, didn't you just come from Italy? I think I got a chance to go there. What do you think? And I was like, don't even think about it. Go.
Yeah.
It was the best 3 years of my career so far.
Yeah.
And when I left there, I thought, well, I can't turn down dive school instructor because that's an awesome job as well. But when I'm done, I'm going right back to Sicily.
Yeah.
That's how much I loved it out there. So anyway, you did your tour out there. Any remarkable things you want to discuss during that tour?
No, I mean, I had a great time. Like I said, it was awesome. I mean, I love DOD because the EOD officers treated me like one of their own, So if you're hoo-yah and you're hard charging and you want to put the time and effort into it, they'll literally adopt you as one of their own. And so, it isn't always the case with other communities.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, but it was great. So EOD was the best choice I could have ever made. I made a lot of good friends, you and so many others that, you and I both know.
For sure.
I got to do all kinds of cool stuff. At one point, the 16th Air Force dropped a bunch of bombs in Lake Garda, which is up in the Italian Alps. And we went up there, spent the entire summer diving, looking for these bombs. It was great. And I actually had more tactical decompression dives in a Mark 16 than any officer in the United States Navy for a period of time.
Wow.
We were diving Mark 16 every day looking for those bombs.
At altitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That is cool. Cool jobs like that, and they happen all the time.
Yeah.
TWA Flight 800, which unfortunately a lot of people died in that incident, but that's right when I got to Panama City, and they said, any Navy diver at any command, we're going to write you orders if you can make it. And I was a single parent at the time. I had just got to Panama City.
Yeah.
As much as I wanted to do that cool job, I was unable to. So great tour out there. What happened after Italy?
So at one point I realized, look, if I'm going to continue to get promoted in the military, I have to get board certified, right? And so because I was a diving medical officer, which is kind of, like a general medical officer that dives,
Right.
So I had to get board certified in surgery or emergency medicine or something, right? To keep getting promoted in the military. So I went back to the Naval Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia, and I got into an emergency medicine residency program there. Did 3 years of emergency medicine residency and finished that. And that was in 2004. And, if you remember back in 2000, I graduated in 2004 from a residency program as a board certified emergency medicine doc. And, around 2004, 2005 in that area, if you were a Navy board certified emergency medicine physician, you by default belonged to the United States Marine Corps, right? Because Iraq and Afghanistan were hot and heavy, and that's what they needed. The ER docs was with the Marines. They were getting butchered, and they needed emergency medicine docs with them. So they immediately sent me straight to Camp Lejeune. I married up with the 2nd Marines, and I went straight to Iraq. And I was the officer in charge of the resuscitation component of a surgical shock trauma platoon. There was a place called Dukatam, which is literally kind of between Fallujah and Ramadi.
Wow.
And so those were two hot spots.
Yeah,
so
the hottest, yeah.
It was a crazy, it was what I trained for, so it was satisfying in that regard. But, I saw horrific injuries every day. Every day, I would say on average, we got 3 to 4 bad casualties a day. We got a lot of smaller, petty stuff. But we were getting people right off the battlefield. They were coming in tactical vehicles. They were landing, in helicopters and dumping them right on our triage pad. We were right on the battlefield, actually. We had people coming, right outside our gate. They were, involved in, IEDs and all kinds of other conflict. But, I was seeing guys that, that had their arms and legs blunt, that had their bowels hanging out, that had gray matter hanging out. Horrible, horrific injuries, burns from head to toe. So from a medical standpoint, it was a phenomenal experience, and it was satisfying because you got to do what you trained to do, and you actually felt like you were making a difference, right? Like you were saving lives and you were doing what you signed up to do. But, it was horrible to see a lot of these young kids, maimed and, never the same, and some of them didn't come home at all.
Do you think your time at the Texas University in the, what was it, a morgue you worked in there?
Yeah.
Do you think that helped prepare you for what you saw on the battlefield?
I think so. I'd been around a lot of that stuff. And I had the unenviable task when I was in Iraq of a collateral duty. I was the mortuary affairs officer. And so my job was when anybody got killed in all of the Al-Anbar province, they had to bring them back to our base before they flew them out. And then I had to go whenever they got there, sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd get a call on the radio, we need you in mortuary affairs. I'd have to get up out of my bed, put my body armor on, put my helmet on, put my sidearm and get in my gator and drive down the road to the mortuary affairs and go in there. And I would have to examine the body and sign the death certificate.
Wow.
And the family couldn't be notified. They couldn't be flown out until I...
Yeah, comms blackout.
And comms blackout the whole 9 yards until I signed the death certificate.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my job. And I mean, sometimes you'd go in and, there would be a body bag and I would unzip it. And I honestly could not tell which end was the head and which was the feet. It was a bag of like burnt hamburger meat with bone shards sticking up.
Yeah.
Basically.
Wow.
There were times where it was just a 5-gallon bucket on the floor and that's all they had,
Wow.
So, I think that my time is, doing autopsies helped prepare me for that part of it at least.
For sure. Yeah, that is the tragedy of war and warfare. And if I recall, was it on that tour or a different tour where you signed the death certificate of one of our EOD brothers?
No, that was on that tour. And, also I took care of a Crabtree as well. He was with him, right?
Clayton, I believe.
Yeah. They were right outside our gate at TQ, literally right outside our gate. And they were coming, I believe they were coming from I can't remember. They were coming from, I think, Indian Head. And they were back. So there was a call for, there was an IED right outside our gate. Mm-hmm. And so the two of them weren't really assigned to the EOD team that was there, but they broke a couple of other guys out to give them a break, and they went out there to do it. And it was one of the IEDs where, as they were approaching the IED, there was another IED.
Secondary device
that was in the path. And as soon as they got to, where they were close to the secondary device, it was remotely detonated. Mm-hmm. And it was horrific. He was decapitated basically. I think he was Mobile Unit 3. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was a young second-class petty officer. Mm-hmm. I can remember, Mobile Unit 3, young kid. And then Crabtree, of course, just got fragged to the face. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. And his entire face was just covered in frags, including like both of his eyes were completely ruptured and running out.
Yeah, he's blind today.
Blind now. So, but yeah, those are kind of guys that they sacrificed it, a lot for our country.
Yeah, the ultimate sacrifice. Do you know Brad Snyder, right?
Yeah, sure do.
And of course he had a similar blast injury that left him blinded, and such a horrific blast that the barrel of his weapon actually kind of wrapped around his body armor. Yeah. So that's significant. So. Yeah, those things over there, and let me just ask you, because you have seen, you've seen it at its absolute worst. I don't think people could have seen things and experienced things any worse than you have. TBI and PTSD are big things in the veteran community. I've got the mildest form of TBI, but PTSD comes from the things that you've experienced.
Right.
How do you resolve that?
Well, I haven't had any issues with it really yet. I don't expect that I will, but I think being an emergency medicine physician before I saw a lot of that stuff, mm-hmm. I think kind of like slowly prepared you for that kind of stuff. Because I'd seen a lot of death and I'd seen a lot of horrible things. I'd seen little kids get killed, and stuff like that, and I'd had people die that I'd been working on in the emergency department before I got there. And, so we certainly had a few people that died while we were working on them in Iraq. Yeah. So I think that, my time as an emergency medicine physician, I'd done rotations at big trauma centers at LA County and stuff like that. Prepare myself, as an emergency medicine physician. So I think that made a difference. And I think, but it's not the case for everybody, I remember the very first casualty we had in Iraq when I showed up. First off, I remember the crazy thing is there were 2 emergency medicine docs that were there when I got there, and I was relieving them, and I was by myself. Wow. And they were both way more seasoned than I were. They'd been in emergency medicine community for a long, long time. I was just out of I would just finish my residency, and I remember showing up, and I thought to myself, man, I don't know if I know what I'm doing, right? I was like, I was looking around.
I think we all experience that to some extent.
I thought to myself, man, I think they made a mistake sending me over here by myself, and I was terrified, right, that these guys were about to leave the next week. There was a week of turnover. We had all kinds of these horrible casualties coming in, and this place was running like a fine oiled machine, and everything was happening. And I was thinking, man, what am I going to do when they leave? I don't know if I know what I'm doing, right? But it worked out. Right after they left, you get thrown in the fire pretty quick, and you realize you're well trained, right? And you just fall back on your training. Absolutely. And I never missed a beat. I realized I knew exactly what I was doing. And it's amazing when I went in there, I really I didn't have any real confidence in my abilities, and I was questioning myself. When I left that place, man, I was the most confident person you'd ever met. I came back to the United States and I worked in an emergency department. I was there. I could care less what comes through that door. It doesn't matter what it is. I can take care of it, right? I mean, it gives you an incredible sense of confidence, to be there. And it prepares you. But, the first time we had somebody die, I'd been there just a few days after these guys left, and I was by myself there. Now I had a couple of surgeons who were with me, but as soon as you have the first 2 patients go back to the surgical tent, you're by yourself on the triage pad, right? And you got to figure out, you got to make pretty simple decisions. Can this person live another 30 minutes? If they can, get them on the helicopter and get them to Baghdad right now. Is this person, essentially dead and we can't do anything for them, or, are they going to die and we just need to put them in the corner and make them comfortable? Or is this somebody that if we don't open them up right now and stop this bleeding, they're going to die right here? You have to make those decisions. And, and I have to tell the surgeons, I don't care what you're doing right now on the table, pack it off and get it off the table. You got to get this guy back here right now. And things like that, right?
Wow.
But the first one we had that died, we got this kid and came in. He was 20-something years old. He was an Army soldier, and he had hit an IED, and the IED had hit him, and he had been fragged all over, but he had all kinds of wounds to his chest and his pelvis. And we brought him in, and he got him on the table, and I was getting ready to put him to sleep to intubate him, so we're taking him right back to the OR, right? I put central lines in him, at his neck and stuff, and I was doing all this other stuff. I think I put a chest tube in him. I did all this stuff, and I was getting ready to intubate him, and I told him, I said, look, I'm gonna put you to sleep, and when you wake up, you're gonna be like in Longstool or somewhere or whatever, but he said, hey guys, this is the last thing he said to me. He said, am I gonna die, doc? And I said, you're not gonna die. We're gonna take good care of you, right? And I pushed the meds. We put him to sleep. We intubated him. We got him into the OR. And as soon as they opened up his abdomen, I mean, his blood pressure and pulse, were okay. But, I mean, he was seriously injured. But he was young and he had a lot of reserve, And as soon as they opened up his abdomen, all the blood in his pelvis just started coming out. And his blood pressure just dropped like a rock. It just went through the roof. And he was basically dying right there, right? So we were trying to pack it off, and they were trying to suction all the blood out of his pelvis as fast as they could and stuff, packing in there. But it was like this pelvic bleeding. It was like this venous bleeding. It was just oozing up his whole pelvis and full of blood. And they'd suck it out. So we called for the walking blood bank, and we got Marines lined up out there that were giving us like whole blood right there in the scene. And we brought it back, and we gave this guy something like 42 units of blood. I mean, I was at the head of the bed just squeezing the blood in as hard and fast as I could, so much that I was getting cramps in my forearms.
Wow.
But we couldn't, and anyways, ultimately, we worked on this kid for almost 3 hours, and he ultimately died on the bed. And it was devastating for my team, man. I remember watching my corpsman and my medics and stuff walk around, and everybody was just devastated. So that's the kind of stuff, that you always remember.
Yeah. Well, that devastation, I mean, it gives me chills when you say that, because you referenced your team.
Yeah.
Your whole team was working hard, and your whole team had hope.
Yeah.
And when that hope clearly was gone, what a downer! What a heavy thing to deal with. Holy cow!
And then you got to go out there and you got to tell his teammates that he died. It's also difficult.
Wow. Post-Iraq, I know at some point you were selected for White House duty. And by the way, Doc Jackson wrote this awesome book called Holding the Line. And a lot of what he's discussing now is in the book. And how he got selected for White House duty is an incredible story. And so we're going to discuss that when we come back. We're going to take a quick break for capitalism. Dr. Jackson and I are both good capitalists, and we'll be right back. I want to take a minute to tell you about my book titled Elevate Your Leadership: How to Develop, Maintain, and Advance Lifelong Leadership. This book is based on my 26 years in U.S. Navy Special Operations and now 13 years in the private sector. Leadership is a perishable skill and a personal brand. In Part 1, I guide you through building and applying your personal brand of leadership. Leadership also requires physical energy and mental clarity. In Part 2, I go over the 6 key components of health and wellness and how you can apply these components every single day to become a great leader. This book is also breathable. What does that mean? It's 170 pages, 12-point font, with charts and graphs and pictures to break up the monotony of reading page after page. Finally, this book is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and of course, RobertPizzini.com. Folks, I want to take a minute and talk about Breeden Construction. Breeden Construction built iFly Virginia Beach 10 years ago, and our building is solid. Why? Building a standard. Our standard is excellence. Visionary thinking innovative design, dynamic solutions, and transformative growth. While others may see lofty ideals, we see the very foundation needed to construct a better future. This isn't just a promise we make to you, it's the standard we uphold. This is Breeden Construction. Learn more at breedenconstruction.com. Headquartered in Virginia with offices throughout Virginia and North Carolina, you can contact Breeden Construction directly at area code 804-364-4600. Breeden Construction, a national general contractor. And we are back. We're talking with Dr. Ronny Jackson, Congressman Ronny Jackson, Admiral Ronny Jackson, or as I like to call him, Ronny or Doc. And so, first of all, I just can't thank you enough for coming here and doing the podcast today. So here, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is Virginia Beach, Virginia. We're at iFly Virginia Beach, third floor of the building. The building overlooks the ocean front. We have a beautiful conference room. We host corporate events. I have put together a leadership and team development event called Elevate Your Leadership. You can access that at robertpizzini.com to learn more about it. It's an incredible event. We'll do half day, full day, multi-day. I bring in awesome guest speakers. Maybe we'll get Dr. Jackson to be a guest speaker one day. These are professionals who are sharing the very valuable life experience that they've had. They share it with us, and it makes us better. And I'm lucky to experience this type of learning at my level on a regular basis. So robertpizzini.com and see what we have going on. All right, Ronny, so after that time in Iraq, at some point you went from there to the White House. How did that transition happen?
Well, I was out in Iraq, and I didn't even know about the White House job. I'd never heard of a White House position. I mean, it makes sense that they have a position in the White House, but I never thought about it, and I certainly didn't know they were the active duty military docs were assigned there, right? But it turns out there's 6 docs there when I first took the job: 2 Army, 2 Navy, 2 Air Force. They were all family practice or internal medicine, and they decided they needed an emergency medicine position at the White House, which is a smart move, right? I mean, it's a lot of
absolutely, for sure.
A stroke or heart attack
or assassination attempt
takes a round to the chest or the head, or an IED hits a motorcade, right? So it's they said, hey, we need an emergency medicine doc here. So they reached out to the emergency medicine detailers in all the services and solicited packages. Well, my detailer or my specialty leader threw my name in the hat without even telling me. And it was kind of a crazy thing. I had a Marine Corps email account out there that was my primary email account, and I had an old email account from the Naval Hospital Portsmouth, where I'd come from before I was pushed out to Camp Lejeune with the Marines, and I still had access to that account, and I check it every now and then when I was in Iraq just to keep up with the gossip at the hospital, whatever. But my main email account was that Marine Corps account. Well, my detailer sent me a message saying that I had been selected to apply for a job at the White House as a White House physician on that email account, and I hadn't checked it in 10 days or so. I logged on. It was a pain in the butt to check your email out there, too. You had to wait
for sure.
Right? It was the old, where you took forever to get on.
Yeah.
So, you didn't check it all that often. But so I checked my email, and I saw this email in that inbox, and it said, hey, you've been selected to apply for this job. Please have your CV, your personal statement, your last 6 fitness reports, your official photo, your security information. There's a list of stuff like 10 miles long that they wanted. And it said you need to have it done. By the time I saw it, it was like Friday close of business, which was like 4 or 5 days away, right? And I was like, holy crap, right? So I thought, this is cool, but there's no way I can do this. I'm in the middle of the desert, right? I can't even have the access to most of the stuff they're asking me for.
Yeah, right.
So I wasn't going to do it. Now I called my wife later on that night. I was talking to my wife on the phone, and she said, what are you going to do? I said, well, Jane, I can't do that. I'm out here in the middle of the desert. It's ridiculous. I can't make that happen out here. And she said, well, you should try anyways. You should try to get everything together and make an effort, because it may be important career-wise down the road that you were considered for the job. So at least get your name in the hat and get considered for it, because you can, that might be important down the road. She was smart. It was right. That was a good call. I said, you're right about that. I'll see what I can do. So she was digging stuff out of my filing cabinet back home. I had people at the hospital I worked, digging stuff up. I was ginning stuff up electronically out in the out in Iraq. I was getting my official photo and, in my BDUs in front of a HESCO barrier, so it's crazy stuff.
Primary and secondary weapons strapped to your body.
Exactly. But I got everything that they asked for in by the deadline, but I figured I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, right? I figured everybody else is going to have these nice squared away packages. Mine's going to be this pile of garbage, right? So I got it all in. Didn't hear anything for like 2.5 months, not a single word, right? I talked to my detailer. He's like, I don't know, man. He goes, we turned it over to the White House. We lost oversight of it, right? And so I didn't hear anything. So about 2.5 months went by, and I was like, well, obviously somebody else already got the job, and I'm just out here in the middle of nowhere, and I hadn't even really heard about it yet. So I kind of just stopped checking that email, because I'd been checking it pretty regularly, waiting to hear what happened. And then 2.5 months in, like I said, I just happened to check that email again. And once again, it had been about 7 to 10 days since I checked it, pulled it up, and there's an email in there from my detailer saying, you've been selected as one of 3 people to interview for a job at the White House. Please be in D.C. by Friday close of business, right?
And you're in Iraq still.
And I'm still in Iraq, right? Or maybe it was Monday, whatever. But I was still in Iraq. It was 5 days, 5 days away.
Yeah, you call Delta, get a flight,
So I was like, crap. I was exciting. I made it this far, but obviously this is where the road ends because there ain't no way I'm being DC, in 5 days.
Yeah.
And so as luck would have it, my commanding general for all the Marines, he's a commanding general for all the Marines in the Al-Anbar province. He was my commanding general, was a guy named General Whistler. And it just so happens that General Whistler had been the military aide, the guy that carries a nuclear football with Bush 41.
Oh, wow.
So at the White House, the military aide that carries a nuclear football, the physician to the president, and the Secret Service agent that's in charge of the president's detail, the SAC, those 3 people are considered what they call the EA team, the Emergency Action Team. And they have to be with the president 24/7, 365, and they always have to be less than 2 minutes away from the president. So this guy had spent a long time working side by side, day after day, with the White House physician. He knew exactly what the job was, and he knew like it was an opportunity I'd never get again. Right?
Wow.
I didn't understand any of that. I didn't really even know.
And he's in Iraq with you. He's your immediate superior.
Right. He's in Iraq with me. He's a 1-star at the time. So anyways, I told my commanding officer what was going on. He told his commanding officer what was going on, and then he told the general what was happening. So the general summoned me to his office, and he goes, tell me what's happening. So I told him the whole story, and he goes, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, sir, there ain't no way I'm going to be in Iraq or be in D.C. in 5 days. I said, but I'm still going to, I'm going to do the interview. I'm going to see if they can let me do a video teleconference or maybe an interview by phone. I said, honestly, I don't know how competitive I'm going to be, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And he said, stand by. He picks the phone up. He calls the air boss, right? The guy that controls all the air assets in the Al-Anbar province. He calls this guy's talking to him. And the last thing he says is, I want his ass out of here by sunset. He hangs the phone up and he goes, go pack your shit, you're leaving, right? And I was like, yes, sir. So I went back to my hooch. I got my sea bag. I threw some stuff in it. I went out to the flight line. I got on a helicopter, flew to Baghdad. Got to Baghdad, got on a C-5 cargo plane full of broken helicopters, flew back to Cherry Point, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. That's where they bring them.
Yeah. Got a rental car. Jumped in a rental car, drove back to Virginia Beach where I was living at the time, before I transferred. My wife is still here after I transferred to Lejeune because I didn't really stay in Lejeune long. I went straight to Iraq.
Yeah.
So drove back here, and then I was supposed to be at the White House interviewing for the job the next morning. And I was supposed to interview for 3 days, 2 days in a business suit and 1 day in a uniform, right? But I was in a dead panic. I was like, I had no clothes that fit, none, right? When I was in Iraq, I started running a lot. I was running like 6 miles in the morning, 6 miles in the evening. I mean, I was just like crazy. I lost 40 pounds when I was in Iraq, right?
Wow.
So I had no clothes that
I lost about 15 or 20 during my deployment.
I was in an absolute panic, man, right? So I went to the Men's Warehouse, me and my wife, and we went in, I bought a new suit, and then I just like basically gave them my sob story and begged them to help me tailor it, on the
For sure.
They did.
Yeah.
So they helped me make it presentable and did my pants and got it, and then they actually helped me. I brought my uniform, and they helped me with my uniform a little bit. And then I got back in my rental car, drove to D.C. The next morning for the interviews. Interviewed for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, they told me I got the job. I went back to Iraq for 4 months to finish my tour.
Wow.
And then came straight from Iraq to the White House when I was done. And I was the brand new junior physician for George W. Bush, and that was in early 2006.
Wow. And there's a few other things, because I have read the book, there's a few other things in that story, but I realize that's a deep dive. So then when you came back, you came back from Iraq and went straight to that job working for George W. Bush.
Yep.
Wow.
And I was the junior doc then. So initially I was assigned to Cheney. I was Cheney's doctor.
Okay.
Because there was, like I said, 6 positions there. 4 were assigned to the president, and 2 were assigned to the VP. And there was one senior guy that's a VP doc, and then he had the most junior guy as his backup, and that was me at the time.
Okay.
So I came in, I was the junior doc for Cheney. I only did that for about 6 months, and another doc showed up. Somebody on the Army side had rotated it out. He had a new Army doc in. There was now the junior doc, so he took over as the VP doc, and then I fleeted up to the president's side, and I became the primary physician for Mrs. Bush. And then I also covered a lot of the presidential stuff when the other doc that was in charge of the president's at the time couldn't do it. So I was on the POTUS side. I was on the president's side at the time. And
I bet you they loved having a homeboy from Texas,
I had a unique advantage.
You guys were probably trading barbecue recipes.
Yeah. I had a unique advantage because Mrs. Bush grew up just a few miles north of where I did. We grew up basically in West Texas. And so, so I did all the ranch stuff for the most part. Like they'd go to the ranch, and I was a designated ranch guy. Some of the other docs, didn't grow up,
Clearing brush.
Clearing brush and stuff. And they hated the ranch because it was hot. We worked our butts off, right? We literally worked outside all day long.
Yeah.
Grubbing hoes and chainsaws and cutting down cedars and making bike trails and all kinds of stuff, It was hard work, but it was a real team building thing.
Yeah.
That we did, and everybody was out there. It was the president, the staff secretary, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had come, whoever happened to be at the thing,
You were a roustabout. You were prepared for that.
Exactly. Yeah. All the senior staff were out there and, working, so it was fun. But, so I did that for a couple of years. And then at the end of the Bush administration, I was supposed to leave because I had 3-year orders, and I got there the last 3 years of the Bush administration.
Okay.
I was supposed to just do the last 3 years of the Bush administration, and then I was going to move on. Well, I was going to tell you because I had this unique thing with Mrs. Bush, and she would always introduce me, and she'd go, "Do you guys know Doc Ronny?" She goes, "Doc Ronny's our doctor, and he's from West Texas. He's one of us, right?" And so I had this unique West Texas connection with the Bushes, which worked out really well. But at the end of that 3 years, what happened is all these other docs, like I said, there were 6 of them, and there was just me and this one other junior guy behind, and then so three of the most senior ones, they either retired or moved on to another job at the end of the Bush administration. So there was suddenly this, vacuum where we lost all this, all the leadership all at once. So the Pentagon said, "Hey, we can't have you leave too, because that's way too many people leaving all at once. We need some continuity here. So we're going to cut you a set of orders, extend you at the White House Medical Unit for another 2 years, and we're going to make you the deputy director of the White House Medical Unit." So they extended me into the Obama administration as deputy director of the White House Medical Unit. Did that for a couple of years, did a good job, and they promoted me to director of the White House Medical Unit, and then position to the White House, assistant to the president, position to the president, senior advisor to the president, chief medical advisor. Every time I got a new title and a new level of responsibility, I got a new set of orders on active duty.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up staying at the White House the last 14 years of my 25 years on active duty. I was at the White House.
Wow. That's incredible. That's almost half your career, basically.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And during that time, you served 3 presidents. You talked about President Bush, and then obviously there was a transition. You said you served the last 3 years of President Bush's.
The last 3 years of the Bush
of his second term.
Of his second term.
Yeah. Okay.
All 8 years of the Obama administration and the first 3 years of the Trump administration.
Okay, that's right. Because I in my EOD role, I was active duty at the time. I was in the booth for the second inaugural for President Bush, and so all the people you mentioned, Dick Cheney and Dick, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time.
I can't remember. Yeah.
I'll think of it in a second. He was an Air Force guy. But everybody in
Colin Powell and all those guys around.
Yeah. Everybody in the review booth, and then Schwarzenegger showed up. It was a pretty. Although it was a cold day in January, and I couldn't wait for the shift to end because I was freezing. But it was really cool. So President Obama. So what was it like? A little bit about the transition from Bush to Obama, but then 8 years with Obama. That's a long time to spend with somebody. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was a good job. I mean, I started out as the deputy director of the White House Medical Unit, and then I was kind of doing most of the work. And so the guy that was the appointed physician to the president for the first few years of the Obama administration, he was also the director of the White House Medical. He was dual-hatted. So he quickly turned over the director's job to me. So I wasn't dual-hatted anymore, and I became the director of the White House Medical Unit. So I was in charge of overseeing like Air Force One, like any of the medical stuff with Air Force One, HMX, Camp David, White House Communications Agency. I worked closely with the Secret Service. I was in charge of all making sure that we did our part on all the presidential advances in the country, all over the world. Basically, I grew the unit. When I got there, the unit was about 26 people. Like I said, we had 6 physicians and maybe like 6 or 7 nurses, corpsmen, some medics. It's pretty small. It's about 26 people. And so then I became the director. And like I said, they're all family practice and internal medicine. I started working as the director, and I basically I got us into our mission grew significantly. I won't talk about what we did, but our mission really ballooned and it grew significantly. So by the time I left that unit, it went from 26 to about 60 something.
Wow.
We had 10 physicians. We had about 16 PAs, all combat PAs.
Yeah.
We had I think probably 12 critical care emergency medicine nurses. We had corpsmen, we had medics, we had therapists, we had administrators, we had everything. We had this big unit.
So a little CEO flex, in the private sector, growing an organization with those skills and capabilities. That's what CEOs, that's part of what they're supposed to do in their role. So congratulations there.
Part of that was because, like you said, with the CEO too, we went out, I went out as the director of the White House Medical Unit, and I found new missions for the unit too.
Exactly.
The mission grew, and when your mission grows, you become that much more important to that many more people, right? And so we got to the point where we were just indispensable, and not just to the president and the first family, but to anything and everything involving the White House and the executive branch.
Wow. So on that thread, what about this? I don't want to get to the whole Biden thing just yet, but what are KJP, the press secretary, who's saying that
the box of rocks.
The box of I love that. I made a note on that because thank you for using proper military terminology, right? So I saw that in an interview. You called her a box of rocks, but how silly is that she's suggesting that this doctor came to see 1,500 other White House medical staff or whatever.
Yeah. Well, he's out because we called him on it, you know what I mean? And they tried to defend it, and they really thought that the mainstream media and the liberal press were going to do what they've done for the last 3.5 years and give them complete top cover, right?
Yeah.
Change the narrative, stop talking about it, move on. But, they didn't. I mean, the left turned on them a little bit.
Yeah.
The press turned on them, and they stopped giving them top cover. And they were every day in a position where they're going to have to explain what they were talking about because we could see with our own eyes, and we had the visitors logs from the White House.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't get out of it, and it just snowballed on them, and it got worse and worse.
Yeah.
And eventually, it was they could never.
You know what really just shocks me, and it shouldn't, because I've seen a lot of things, but it shocks me that they did hide it for so long because. At what point are you an American first? At what point are you concerned, number one, about President Biden's wellness, because clearly he's not well.
Right.
So that needs to be addressed. But because he's not well, America is at risk. And at what point does the press and does his own staff say, we have a problem here? And even in view of this kind of handing off of the torch, if you will, to Kamala, they still haven't addressed the underlying issue. He's still the president for 9 more months, and we still haven't addressed or faced head on the underlying issue of his mental wellness.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's commander in chief. He's head of state. I mean, he's got an important job, right? I mean, he can send our kids to war, right? I mean, and we need somebody in that job who knows what they're doing, and obviously he doesn't, right? So, they all had a responsibility that they...
He didn't know what he was doing before the illness.
No, he didn't. I mean, I was calling him out in 2019.
Yeah.
I was like, you're right. But even when he was a senator, he was, still pretty... He wasn't the smartest guy around.
Right.
But now he's completely cognitively impaired, and it doesn't even really know what's going on most of the time, which is horrible if you think that the gravity of the job that he has.
For sure.
But look, they all failed miserably in their responsibilities, whether it was Joe Biden or it was his senior staff or it was his physician. But the thing is, if you look back, I can explain to you exactly what happened. They covered it up because the press secretary, everybody else, because the day he leaves is the day they all leave, right? Their power, their influence, their authority that they have in the jobs that they have in the West Wing of the White House is all tied to him.
Gotcha. Right? Self-interest.
Yeah. So the day he's not the president, so they tried desperately everything they could to keep him in the basement to cover it up.
Yeah.
And it's just it was too much. And so,
wow.
Joe Biden, I knew right off the bat, before he was elected, she wanted to be first lady more than she wanted her next breath. Right.
Wow.
She's addicted to that role. And the power that comes with it. And so she was the biggest, I think, one push, and his doctor, obviously. But the two of them, his doctor and the first lady, should have been the ones that were talking to him, that were talking to other family members, that were talking to senior staff, and they were basically trying to figure out a way to get out of this and have him resign or leave and turn over to somebody who was competent to do the job.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen.
So there's an effort to enact the 25th Amendment. Are you familiar with that? Are you part of that?
Yeah, I know what it is. I mean, obviously, the 25th Amendment was something I dealt with on a day-to-day basis as a physician of the White House. Something, but it has to be. It's not going to happen. I'll just tell you that right now, because the only way that it can happen, it has to be the president's cabinet and the vice president have to initiate it. So it has to be initiated by Kamala Harris and by his cabinet. It has to be 2/3 of his cabinet and the vice president who have to say that he's not competent to do the job. and then they basically make that declaration to the Senate and to the House, to the Speaker and to the Senate Pro Tem, and tell them that he's not. And then the president can say he is, and then he stays as president for another within 72 hours. Both bodies, the House and the Senate, have to come together, and they have to have a 2/3 vote in both houses saying he's not qualified to be the president. So my point is they've already basically made her their nominee now, and he's a placeholder. They're not going to mess that up. So it's really up to the Democrats to enact the 25th Amendment. The Republicans talk about it all they want, but there's no process in place for the Republicans to pull the trigger on the 25th Amendment without the president's vice president, his own cabinet being intimately involved in that. It's just not going to happen.
How at risk are we in terms of national security and in terms of our power projection around the world, given the fact that we have a president who clearly has difficulty functioning, and we're locked into the situation that you just described?
And we're in a horrible position. You know, our adversaries don't fear us anymore, and our allies don't trust us anymore. And our adversaries see this as a window of opportunity.
For sure.
And that's really the reason that Putin came into Ukraine. It was because of Biden and the Biden weakness, which was showcased internationally with the horrific withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's what started it all, right? They saw that, and they took note of that, and they said, you know what? And this is the time that we're going to be aggressive. And, you know, she's probably going to do something similar with Taiwan, you know, at some point. I would have figured he'd already done it by now, but I think it's still a possibility he might do it before Biden actually leaves.
Yeah.
Because when Trump comes back in, that game is over. I mean, you know, they know Trump's going to do what he says he's going to do, and they know that Trump, it won't put up with a lot of what's happening in the world right now. And he's a leader. He's not a weak opportunity for them to advance themselves.
Yeah, it's going to be like when Reagan came in after Carter, and we had the hostages in Iran.
Right.
Reagan said, my first day in office, those hostages are coming home one way or another.
That's right.
And the deal was negotiated, I think, at the evening of the turnover from Carter to Reagan is when they were released. So I really like Trump's, heavy hand and Trump's staunch support of American interests and U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy.
Right.
So that's, another thing that I think, and I'm surprised I haven't heard any discussion about this, but the border, we know, has been a mess, and I've 1.5 million, or I forget what the number is. It's probably more than that. And that's a burden on our economy. It's a burden on me as a taxpayer. It's a burden on, local school districts and local economies, et cetera. But I think the day that President Trump wins the election in November is the day that border's going to be overrun, because people are going to know they've only got until January to cross the border because they know Trump is going to lock it down.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's going to happen, and they this is by design. Don't fool yourself. The Democrats wanted the border open. They wanted these people coming in, millions and millions of undocumented immigrants crossing our border, many of them criminals, many of them ISIS terrorists. We know for a fact. We know they're here. We don't know where they're at, but we know they crossed our border. And it's in the hundreds of ISIS terrorists that we know crossed our border, and we know that, like, President Trump's absolutely right. There's a lot of countries out there, especially these Central American and Latin American countries, that took advantage of our open border, and they unburdened themselves by dumping their prisons, and they dumped hardened criminals like MS-13 and folks like that into our country. And they don't have to feed them, house them, and they don't have to worry about them causing propagating crime in their own countries anymore, because now they're in our country. Right?
Yeah.
So, they did this, and they did it by design. And the Democrats to this day, I mean, I tell you, Kamala Harris shares as much responsibility for not, getting rid of Biden as anybody. I mean, she one of the reasons why I think that they need to hang this around her neck. We talked about those that were responsible, that covered up Biden's cognitive inabilities. She was chief among them. But in addition to that, she has completely run amok, and she was supposed to be the border czar. She didn't do a dang thing to stop the border, nothing, right? But she's actually making a case that everybody in this country, even undocumented immigrants in this country, should get their education paid for, should get their health care paid for. Those are our tax dollars, right?
Right.
I can tell you, we can do that, but when we do that, you are not going to get the services that you're accustomed to getting, the services that you and your tax dollars paid for, right? You're going to go to the emergency department with a serious injury, and you're going to sit in the lobby having a heart attack while countless, undocumented immigrants are there for medical care. Right? That's what's going to happen in this country. The level of care that you're going to get is going to drop like a rock, and the amount of money it takes to get that care is going to go through the roof, including the amount of money that your tax dollars are going, the tax dollars you're paying for healthcare in this country are going to skyrocket because we're providing, and it's a magnet. It draws people over here, right? That's why they started coming, because the Biden administration gave them everything. They gave them food, they gave them cell phones, they gave them education, they gave them health care, they gave them housing, right? Why wouldn't you not come here if you're poor and desperate in another country,
or a criminal looking to escape,
right?
Yeah,
want to come over here and take advantage, yeah. So, and then you combine that with the complete lawlessness that the Biden administration has propagated all over this country with their war on police officers, right? And defund the police and everything else. It's a perfect scenario for the stuff we're seeing right now in some of these big blue cities like New York, where criminals are just running amok.
Yeah. It's funny. I was in New York. I was in New York last week and did not ride the subway. But the previous time I was there, and I want to say it was maybe a year ago, I can't remember. But I remember, I had one of those 5 a.m. flights, and I'm riding the subway at 3 in the morning or whatever. And, I know how to take care of myself, and I know how to identify danger. And I remember being on that subway platform, wondering if the 4 or 5 young men, military-age males, right, which is what we're trained to be alert for. At 3 in the morning, why are they there? And am I a target? And then at that moment, a couple uniformed police officers walked up, and I got on the train and didn't make it to the airport, which is where I intended to go, but,
I mean, it's bad for a while there. New York was, it literally was like Gotham City.
Yeah, well, National Guard on the subways, I guess they're not there now. They very quietly redeployed, but that's a big deal. When you deploy your National Guard to guard your subways, you've got a problem in your city. Holy cow. Right. I know the police chief here in Virginia Beach personally, and I see him at several events, Chamber of Commerce, and city council forums, etc. And I always ask him, how are we doing compared to these other cities? And of course, he's going to say we're doing much better. It's his city, it's his job. But he knows what he's talking about. He's got the detail. And I say, do we need help? Should we ask for help? We have so many reserve forces here, and he's like, we have a great relationship with all of those entities, but our police department is more than capable of handling anything we come up against at this point. Yeah. And I sure love to hear. And we never did any defunding here. Always fully supported our officers, even though we're at, I think he said, an 80 officer deficit right now.
And even the officers, in these big cities, they don't want to do their jobs because if they go out and risk their lives to arrest these people, the prosecutors, these woke prosecutors, just let them go.
Yeah, that's terrible. That is just unbelievable. Okay, so we had our discussion about the Biden and the Biden administration. I'll just ask you one last thing there to kind of close that out. I've seen a couple of interviews on various news channels with Parkinson's trained physicians, and one in particular, he said I might be wrong, I might be paraphrasing here, but he said any first-year med student would recognize those symptoms from a distance and recommend follow-on evaluation or examination, because those are clear indicators that the way the president moves, the way he speaks, those are all clear indicators. Do you have any thoughts on that as it relates to Parkinson's?
Yeah, he's got something similar to Parkinson's if he doesn't have Parkinson's. His physician has put in writing that he doesn't have Parkinson's, but I think he did that. I think that's a distraction. I think that he has something very similar to Parkinson's, right? There's a lot of other, movement disorders and cognitive disorders that are very, very similar to Parkinson's. Some of them not as bad, some of them worse than Parkinson's, right? Like this Lewy body dementia and things like that, which is what a lot of people think he has, right? Very bad, right? And so I think that was a play on words. That was a way to distract and try to get people. That was, like I said, they were trying to get the left and the liberal media to pick up on that and move on. Didn't happen, but he's got something going on. He's got serious cognitive issues.
Yeah,
and it's something similar to Parkinson's, because you can see he's got these physical manifestations of the movement disorder where he's rigid and he's got this blank stare and no emotionless face, and just
can't walk up,
swing his arms, all these things, he drags his feet, these are things that go along with that. And you said, Parkinson's specialists, it's so bad that you don't have to even be a physician to see it. I mean, everybody sees him, and everybody has had a relative at some point,
Exactly.
knows somebody who had a relative that they've seen that's gone through this. And your average person looks at Joe Biden and they go, I know what that is.
Yeah,
I have
right.
an aunt or a grandmother or somebody that's been through that I know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And right down to, but can't use the big boy steps on the airplane anymore.
Right.
I mean, what more do we need to see than that? I mean, that's not, I've got lower back issues, had surgery and all that, and it flares up. And there's times when I have difficulty walking, but it's not Parkinson's. Yeah. It's hardware that, doesn't always work as good as it should. So.
Yeah, and I said I don't think they'll use the 25th Amendment. I don't think they will, because their goal is going to be to hide this guy in November.
Yeah.
But if he does have to get out, if something big happens in this country, have a terrorist attack or something like that, they could turn on him and do something like that. I think he would they'd convince him to leave voluntarily, but they could remove him if something bad happened.
Yeah. Wow.
So, but I mean, I hope it doesn't. But we're in a really kind of dangerous situation right now.
Yeah. Nationally and internationally in particular. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to President Trump. I know, as you said, you were his physician for the first 3 years, and can you just kind of talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was his physician for probably the first 14 months or so, and then I got the nomination for the Secretary of the VA, and then we can talk about that at some point too later on. But so I ended up withdrawing my nomination for the VA Secretary, and I stayed on as Chief Medical Advisor, so I had more of a policy job, but I was a senior advisor, assistant to the President, and Chief Medical Advisor.
Okay.
So, but I was there the 3 years. But I was his personal appointed physician initially. And did that for over a year, and that's when I did the press conference you talked about.
Yeah.
That's when he and I became really close. I mean, I really was not planning on staying. At the end of the Obama administration, I was planning on getting out because I'd already done 20 plus years in the military. I'd already been promoted to flag officer. Like there wasn't much left for me.
It's time to go be the ER doc.
It's time to go out and
have a nice
money,
lawn.
Yeah. I never had a job where I'd actually made any money. I've always been on my government salary, my Navy salary, and. So I was looking forward to getting out, and then it turns out that the Trump transition team were mostly Bush folks, because when Trump got elected, they didn't know anything about how to set up the West Wing, and because they were coming from a political background,
right? So
they did the same thing that every incoming administration does. They reached out to the people that had last done it in their own party. So they reached out to some of the Bush folks to try to help them figure out what roles everybody should have, how to set things up in the West Wing and stuff. So all of those, a lot of those Trump transition folks were Bush folks that knew me from the Bush administration. And when they found out I was still at the White House, still as a physician to the president, because I was the appointed physician to the president for Obama, they called me up and they said, "Hey man, we need you to do me a favor. We need you to stay." And I was like, "What?" They go, "We need you to stay in the job." Right?
Wow.
And I was like, "I'm not staying. I'm getting out."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Look, man, we have all this stuff going on in the transition. We're trying to fix a lot of stuff. And the med unit, the White House medical unit, is hitting on all cylinders. Please just stay and take it off our plate. All right, we need, it's working.
Yeah.
We need you to stay and just take that off our plate, so we don't have to worry about that aspect of it. Right? And I said, look, and so they appealed to me. They said, if you leave, somebody else is going to take it over, and all the stuff you've worked for the last, how many ever 10 or 12 years at the time is just going to fall apart, and the people that that you care about that work for you are going to suffer because the med unit's not going to have good leadership. So I finally said, you know what, I'll stay for 6 months.
Okay.
I'll stay 6 months, and I'll find somebody to take my place that you're comfortable with. I'll do a good turnover, but I'm not staying a day longer than 6 months.
Okay.
And then, of course, I met President Trump, and I knew I needed to get to know him right away because I didn't really know him before he came to the White House.
Sure.
Right? So obviously I was there. The first time I'd met him was when he came down with Mrs. Trump, and President Obama and Mrs. Obama hosted him for tea at the White House.
Okay.
After the election.
Okay.
For the traditional.
Right.
And then President Obama brought him into my office and introduced him to me, and Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Obama went upstairs for tea, and he was showing him around the White House. And he walks in my office and he goes, "This is Dr. Ronny. Doc Ronny's my doc here. He's a Navy doc. He won't be your doc. He's leaving."
He's a U.S. Navy deep sea diver.
That's right. Yeah. He said you'll get another doc. They'll come in. That'll take care of you. And President Trump was like, "Oh yeah, nice to meet you." Whatever. That was it. The next time I talked to him was Inauguration Day, which is a crazy day, right? Because long story short, I won't go into a lot of the details. A lot is in the book, I think. Maybe I don't remember, but I loaded up in the motorcade, and I had to tell President Obama that I wasn't leaving, and he didn't care for that. But it is what it is. And
yeah.
I said, "Hey, I'm staying." He goes, "What do you mean you're staying?" I go, "I'm staying. I'm gonna take care of Trump. And he's like, what? So, but anyways, I got in the motorcade, went over to the Capitol for the inauguration, right, with Obama. And then they did the swearing in at 12:01. I passed my bag that was kind of outfitted for President Obama to another doc that was there that was
going to go with him.
That was going to go with him.
Yeah.
And he passed the bag that he had that he was came in with the President-elect Trump to me. And then I got back in the motorcade and went back to the White House with Trump. So it was kind of weird. I rode up to the Capitol with Obama and rode back to the Capitol.
Was that surreal or what?
Crazy. It was crazy, right? But I knew I needed to get to know President Trump really quickly, so I'd been around long enough to know how to do that. I have an earpiece in all the time, with the radio, listen to the Secret Service traffic, always, because you got to know exactly where the president's at, and something happens and they have to move unexpectedly, you can't get left.
Yeah, you got to get to that location.
You got to get the motorcade, get to the helicopter, as fast as you can, and you have to get there before he does, you're going to get left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you always have the earpiece in, listen to every movement the president's making, and if something bad happens to him, you need to hear that too. You need to be the first to hear that. So I did this. What I did is I got up the very first week that Trump was there, and I'd come in really early, and I would be in my office, and I'd be listening to radio. And, President Trump gets up, hours before everybody else even shows up.
Sure.
I mean, he sleeps like 4 hours a night.
Yeah.
And he's up, watching TV, tweeting, talking on the phone, whatever. He's up, really like, consuming everything that's going on.
Yeah, right. It's good. And it's a good time to do it, too, because you don't have all the other distractions. It's kind of alone time, right, when you can really take it all in.
Yeah. But he would do all that, and then I'd listen to radio, and I would hear, he was Mogul. That was his call sign, Mogul. I think,
it's a good one.
Obama was Renegade, and Bush was Trailblazer.
Okay.
They all have the names, but so he was Mogul. And so I was the radio, and they'd call it out, Mogul, moving to elevator. So I knew my office in the White House was on the ground floor of the White House, directly across from the elevator that came down from the president's bedroom, and my office was directly below his bedroom in that area, right, in the ground floor of the White House. And there's really nothing else. Nobody else has offices in the ground floor of the White House. I was the only one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my office is down there. So I would hear this, and I would get up and go out and walk in and stand in the doorway and right across from the elevator, and he would come down and he'd walk out and he'd see me. I'd be the first person he'd see, right? And he'd go, "Morning, Doc," right? And I'd go, "Morning, Mr. President," right? And of course, he's been up for 3 hours, getting spun up about something, right? He's looking for somebody to talk to, right? So he'd walk over to me and he'd go, "Hey,
I love that.
Did you see this? Did you see that?" Right? And it had nothing to do with medicine. It could be whatever is going on. In the world, right? And I'd say, "Yes, sir." And we'd start talking. He'd go, "Walk with me," right? So I'd walk him to work. About 3 out of 5 mornings initially. I'd walk down the West Colonnade, or walk down the West Colonnade with him.
Right here, cover of the book.
West Colonnade.
That is so cool.
I'd walk down the West Colonnade. We'd walk down the Oval Colonnade, go in the back of the Oval Office. We'd finish up our conversation, and awesome. We'd finish up our conversation, and there'd be people outside waiting. The chief of staff, or the CIA briefer, or the national security advisor, or whoever would be out in the outer oval waiting to come in for his day to start. I'd finish up my conversation. I'd walk out. They'd walk in. His day would start. And then, I'd be with him if he traveled anywhere. If he left the White House, I was with him, throughout the day. And then I'd be the last person to see him in the evening when he was going back up to the residence. So I got to know the president really, really well, really fast. And one of the things I just had an incredible respect for the man. I loved his leadership style, I loved his attitude. I just loved everything about him, right? And he developed a lot of trust and confidence in me. So we just meshed right off the bat. And, not only did I never think about leaving the White House after that.
Oh, wow.
The first 2 weeks, I was like, I'm not going anywhere, right? I love this guy. This is an unbelievable privilege to be here and get to take care of him.
It is a privilege. Serving in that capacity is. What did Jane have to say about that?
Well, she was kind of looking forward to going back to Texas. And she'd already been looking at houses online and everything.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was a little bit of she had to recalibrate a little bit.
Yeah.
In the long run, it worked out well. But yeah, so we over the years we became really good friends as well, and so I consider him a really good friend.
Yeah, that's great. Well, he's such a good friend. He hosted a birthday party for you down in Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invite. That was really cool. Very unique experience. So then let's talk about the VA nomination, because obviously I haven't seen you in years and years and years, and all of a sudden you're nominated to be the Secretary of the Veterans Administration, which what year was that?
That was in 2000, I want to say, 17.
17. Okay, so I'm a veteran. I use the VA,
2018, actually. It was, I think, in March of 18.
Okay. And so, and I will just say this: my experience with the VA has, for the most part, been very positive.
Yeah, yeah.
And the care that I get and the way it's administered, I'm very happy with.
Yeah.
But it's not like that at all locations, obviously. And so I was very excited when you were nominated to be the Secretary of the Veterans Administration. It just seemed like the roundest peg in the roundest hole. It just seemed like the absolute perfect fit. But then politically, you were attacked. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'd never really considered going into politics my entire life, and this is really, I never obviously considered being a cabinet secretary either. And President Trump just, one day we're on the plane. I think we're coming back from Florida, headed back to D.C. We're on Air Force One, and he walks past my cabin. In the Air Force One, it's his bedrooms up front, the first family bedrooms up front, and then the president's office, and then my space, and then there's a small kitchen, and then there's senior staff, and so on and so forth. So I'm up at the front of the plane, and he's walking to his office, and he walks past, and he goes, "Hey, Doc," he goes, "come up, I want to talk to you." So I walk up, and I'm walking to his office on Air Force One. And he says, "Hey, I need you to do me a favor." And I said, "Yes, sir. What do you need?" And I was waiting to, I figured, something related to my current job. And he goes, I want you to be a member of my cabinet.
Wow.
I was like, "What?" He goes, "I want you to be my VA secretary." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You can do it, right?" And I go, "Well, hell yeah, I can do it, but where did this come from, right?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Ronny," he goes, you're the right guy for the job." He said, he goes, "We talk about, veterans and stuff all the time, your son's in the military, you're in the military, you're going to be a veteran." He goes, "We talk about this stuff all the time." And he goes, "You're not beholden to the bureaucracy and all the, the $280, $300 billion, that's out there in their budget every year for the VA.
Mm-hmm.
You're not corrupted by that stuff. Every time we have these conversations, you bring it back to the veterans, like, what's it actually going to do for the veterans? Is it the right thing for the veterans?" He goes, "You're the perfect guy for the job. You really are." So he said, "Go on to talk to Jane about it, and he goes, "But I want you to do this." And he goes, I think you need to do it." And so I said, "Okay." So I went home and talked to Jane, and she was on board with it. There's a big story here that I can't go into because it'll take hours to talk about it. But, but basically, long story short, the establishment, including Republicans, including people like General Kelly, who was the chief of staff at the time, and all the members, the Republican members, as well as the Democrat members of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, which does the confirmation hearings and stuff, and a lot of other people at the Pentagon and elsewhere had already picked somebody to be the VA secretary, right? Because everyone knew that David Shulkin was about to get fired, right?
Okay, yeah.
I knew it. David knew it. David was a good friend of mine, and David knew that he was on the chopping block, right? Everyone knew it wasn't a matter of if, but when he got fired, right? So they were planning ahead, and they had already picked somebody that they knew that they had close relationship with, that they felt like they had influence and control over to some extent, right? Which is in human nature. I'm not faulting them for it. That's human nature.
For sure.
Position to do something like that. You try to, get somebody that you think's gonna, that you're gonna have their ear, right?
Yeah, and they're gonna do a good job.
I'm not criticizing that, but that had happened. I didn't know that. The president didn't know that, right? It was these people behind the scenes that thought it was their job to basically protect the country by picking his cabinet for him, right? And so when president threw my name in the hat, it tipped the apple cart bad, right? And so they went into damage control mode to figure out how to get rid of me. And initially, I think they thought that I was going to follow my sword from an experience standpoint, but I didn't, right? I mean, they had people coming over from the VA. I had a Sherpa at the White House, I had a Sherpa at the VA. They had people coming over from basically 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, just back-to-back briefs. As soon as I would open the door, 5 people that were briefing me would go out, 5 more people to brief me on another subject would come in all day long. They did murder boards in the Indian Treaty Room at the White House, where they had it set up like a congressional hearing room, and were pounding me. I was going out and I was meeting with every single senator. I met with like 60-something senators, everybody on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and a whole bunch of other people in leadership and stuff, and when they were asking me questions, I'd been studying so much about it, I could not only answer the question about something specific in their district, I could tie it to other things in their district, sometimes stuff they weren't even aware of, right? And their staff had to fill them in there about what I was talking about. So I did a really good job preparing myself. They did a good job preparing me, and they realized this guy is going to go out and he's going to get on C-SPAN or wherever this is out. He's going to inspire confidence in the American people. He's going to get confirmed, right? And so they went to Plan B. Plan B was to tear me down personally, right? So that's when they did this. They had people like the president's current physician, Dr. O'Connor, who had left and went to GW, but was had kind of an axe to grind with me. He and several other people that felt like, he always kind of thought he always thought he should have had my job. He was senior to me rank wise, sort of so forth. But I ended up being the president's physician. He ended up being the vice president's physician. I didn't pick that. That's just the people in authority picked it, and that's how those are the jobs they assigned us. But he always was a little bit, I guess disgruntled, and thought he should have had that role. I don't know. That's my opinion, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that because it talks to a lot of people about it. But anyways, so he and several other people had got together with their Ledge Affairs contacts from the Biden vice presidential team, and they went and they talked to Tester, and they made up all these ridiculous stories about me. I mean, absolutely ridiculous, right? Like they had a story out there, and Tester just put them out. He knew they were lies. He knew they were false. And
he's a coward. He's so spineless.
That to this day they won't even admit who said it. It's anonymous. Anonymous people came. I know who did it, right? But they
Can you say who?
Yeah, well, I won't say anything.
Okay.
Him. Because
okay.
I mean, there's still some stuff going on with that, right?
Gotcha.
Now. But yes, look, they were people that were disgruntled employees from my time when I was the director of the White House Medical Unit, people that thought they should have been extended, that wanted to stay longer than their orders, and I didn't ask for an extension for them, or people that thought they should have been promoted within the ranks that didn't get promoted within the ranks, and, whatever. So these were disgruntled people that had an axe to grind with me, but they made up these crazy things. Like one of them was like, they made up a story saying that I went to a Secret Service party, got drunk, and wrecked a government vehicle. Any two-bit investigator can figure out in less than 48 hours whether that did or did not happen.
That's right.
There's police records. There's all kinds of stuff. There's tons of people that would know about that.
Yeah.
Anybody can figure that out, right? And it's insane because, first off, I've never even been to a Secret Service Christmas party. I've never in my life had an accident involving alcohol ever.
Yeah, right.
And if you go back and you look in I think it was the Washington Post about a year before that actually happened. There was a Secret Service agent that went to a Secret Service Christmas party, had too much to drink, got drunk, and wrecked the government vehicle, right? It's like they took that article, cut his name out, pasted my name in, and just recycled it.
Yeah.
They knew it was a lie. There was all kinds of other crap they put out there. There was like Tester called me the Candy Man.
Yeah.
Like,
that's brilliant counterintelligence, by the way, to take an event that actually happened and cut and paste and remove that guy's face and put your face on it. They knew it would be proven to be false at some point. That's espionage.
They didn't care because what they needed was they needed to get the headlines, on MSNBC and CNN,
right,
or else to run, for a couple of days. To tear.
That's all they needed. That's all they needed.
That's all they wanted. They knew that they would have to go back later and say, well, it probably didn't happen. But the damage was done at that
exactly.
point, right? And I was not the person then that I am now. If I was a person then that I am now, I would have just said, I would have told them to cram it up there, and I would have just pushed forward, and I would have been the secretary of the VA, right?
Okay.
But this was new to me. I'd never seen anything like this happen before. Most people hadn't. People were, I tell people I got Kavanaugh'd before Kavanaugh did. I was the warm-up, right? I was the pregame. I just didn't know it at the time, right? And even people in the White House are like, oh my God, I've never seen them come after somebody like this, right? Yeah. So I end up like, it was punishing my family. My wife couldn't leave the house.
Think Obama had anything to do with it?
He could have helped me. That's the thing. One phone call from him to call Tester and say, hey, what are you doing? Like, this is crazy. And that every bit of it would have went away. Yeah. Every bit, instantaneously. So he could have helped me, didn't help me.
It's too bad.
I don't know if he had anything to do with it, but he damn sure didn't help me.
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
So anyways, look, it was punishing my family. I had tripods and stuff, reporters out in front of my house in the morning. My wife couldn't take my kids to school. They couldn't go to the grocery store. They're chasing her vehicle down the street trying to get a comment from her. It was crazy, right? And I was like, so I told the president, I said, it was starting to have an impact on the agenda for the veterans that the president had with the Mission Act and, all this other stuff, this great stuff he was doing for the veterans, right? And so I went to the president, I said, look, this is really starting to have an impact on the VA and on your agenda for the VA as well. Mm-hmm. I think I need to withdraw, right? He didn't want me to. We talked about it, but I said, I'm going to withdraw my nomination. So I withdrew my nomination. Well, I didn't know what I was going to do at the time. President didn't want me to leave. He wanted me to stay. He said, well, look, I want you to go back to being my doc again. But I don't want to do that because I've been doing that for a long time, right? And I was already kind of looking for an exit strategy, from doing the clinical stuff. Yeah. So he said, well, look, I want you to stay. And then, I want you to be assistant to the president. We're going to make you my chief medical advisor. And so I said, okay, that sounds good because that's more of a policy job. And I thought, okay, this will be a good break. It gives me time to figure out what I'm doing next, right? And I'll be involved in the policy side of the White House medical stuff, not the clinical stuff. Right. And it's a nice break. So I did that, and that's what I did for the next year or so. But really, honestly, the entire time, my heart wasn't really in it, I mean, I didn't know I had this uneasy feeling inside about what had happened and where I was going, and where it was leading me. I didn't know, right? And every day I just got more and more of a sense of uneasiness, and I didn't regret it. And I still to this day don't regret not, being the VA secretary. I wouldn't be where I'm at now if I'd done that. I wouldn't be here. So. And that job is really an exercise of futility to some extent.
Oh, for sure.
2 years in that, immersed in that massive bureaucracy is like banging your head against the wall all day long every day. I could have done a lot of good things, but it would have been massively frustrating, right? Anyways, so I didn't know what was going to happen, where it was going to lead me. Then one day I was getting ready to go to work at the White House. I turned the TV on and I saw that, Mac Thornberry, who had been the representative for the 13th Congressional District in the Panhandle of Texas, in the area of Texas I grew up in, was leaving after 26 years in Congress, right?
Wow.
And I just looked at the TV and I had this epiphany. This was back in October of 2016, mind you. And everyone thought on the right and the left that Trump was getting a second term.
For sure.
I guess it was... it was right before the election, right? So would it have been 2000?
Yeah, it's pre-COVID.
Right, pre-COVID, right?
Yeah,
so
probably 19 or 20.
Yeah, that's right. So, anyways, regardless of what the date was, it was in October before the presidential election, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So everybody thought that Trump was getting a second term.
Okay, gotcha. Right? So post-COVID, everybody.
Post-COVID.
Yeah. Gotcha.
No, it was right before COVID. Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is what. Yeah, we'll get the timeline here straight in a minute. Anyways, long story short, it was right before the election in October. Right. Everybody thought the president was getting a second term because honestly, like all the indicators you look at, the economy and everything else, through the roof. Right.
Yep.
And so this would have been October of 2019.
Okay.
October.
Gotcha.
2019.
That makes sense. Yep.
Okay. And but then we didn't know COVID was going to happen because COVID changed everything. So this was pre-COVID. Everybody thought Trump was a slam dunk. He was going to get a second term. Then COVID happened and all the freaking, unsolicited mail-in ballots and all the, all the cheating and all the garbage that followed that completely changed things, right? But this is before that. So I looked at the TV that day and I thought, man, Trump's getting a second term, right? I said, this guy's, leaving a seat that is in a district that I could easily represent. I could go up there and I could represent those folks without changing anything about who I am politically, socially, economically.
And he was a Republican, Thornberry.
Republican, leaving.
Yeah.
The number one most Republican district in the entire country.
Wow.
And he was leaving, and I thought to myself, I'm already ready. I'm already retirement eligible. I'm already starting the process of putting my retirement stuff in. And I just thought it was an unbelievable opportunity to get in a fight and do something about what was going on. And for the first time, I felt like, you know what? This is how this ends, right? It does not end with me walking away from the VA secretary's job, right? This is how this ends. I get elected to Congress. I go to Congress, and these assholes are going to have to deal with me in Congress. Yeah. And that was what prompted me to get it. They're going to have to deal with me in Congress. So it felt like an opportunity. Initially, I walked around the White House that whole day. By the end of the day, it didn't even feel like an opportunity anymore. It felt like an obligation to get in the fight and do something.
Yeah,
I walked straight into the Oval.
Call to duty.
I told the president, I said, I'm leaving. He's like, what do you mean you're leaving? He thought something was wrong. I said, no, I'm running for office. He's like, what? Where? Right? So then we said, by the time I walked out of the Oval that night, I was committed that I was in this fight. And so I went back. I hastily got my retirement stuff together. Can't believe it, but I got retired in just a few weeks, right? I retired from the White House, or retired from the Navy and resigned from the White House on December 1st of 2019. 3 days later, I was in Texas, had to do a lot of readouts and turn over some equipment and everything. It took me a couple of days to get all my stuff turned in. I got on a plane, flew straight to Dallas, picked up a truck I'd bought, a used truck I bought there, drove straight to Austin, and I filed to run for office 2 hours before the filing deadline.
Wow!
Right, and then I was in, and then the rest is history. I spent the next few months, in a hard-fought race. I had 15 other people in the Republican primary running against me.
Holy cow!
So I ended up winning the primary and won the race, and and I ended up going to Congress. And look, I don't regret anything because if the VA secretary thing hadn't happened the way it did, it would have never led me to be a member of Congress.
Yeah.
Because I had zero interest, still do to some extent, but I had zero interest in running for public office. None. It was not something that ever crossed my mind.
Right.
But because of that and the circumstances that followed, it led me to run for Congress and to do it in a determined fashion. And here I am.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. It's incredible that we have so many veterans in Congress now.
We do.
and some of them newer. You're wrapping up your first term, getting ready to run for your second term.
No, I'm wrapping up my second term.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Running for my third term.
Okay. So you are a senior. Are you a senior congressman at this point?
In
Or?
the middle right now. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not quite in the middle yet, but close to the middle.
Yeah, okay. Because I know that, or I suspect anyway, and you would know, it takes years and years and years to really understand how the function of Congress, if you will, with all the subcommittees and party changing chairmanship, from time to time. I mean, there's a lot to learn there. And but do you feel like you're?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The learning curve's steep. I mean, just the whole legislative process makes absolutely no sense, right?
Yeah.
You're like with the way they refer to things and stuff it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot you have to learn, to learn how to legislate, right? But I think we need leaders in Congress, and if you're a good leader, you surround yourself with the right people that know how to do all this, that can not only keep the boat afloat until you figure it all out on for yourself, but can teach you as well. And I've got a phenomenal team. I've got an incredible legislative affairs team. My legislative director, my chief of staff, my director of operations, all these people that work for me.
Your agriculture guy, Doug.
Yeah, Doug's my ag guy, right?
Retired Navy EOD tech.
That's right. Yeah,
that is so cool. That is so cool. Before we totally leave the White House and President Trump and move on to your congressional career and some other really cool things you're doing, I just want to talk about that press conference where you talked about Trump's health.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because in your book, you talk about, hey, somebody said you're probably going to be on Saturday Night Live. You'll be the cold open. And sure as heck you were. Now, I either watched it live or I saw it in its entirety shortly after.
Yeah.
And what I saw was I saw a Navy Special Operations officer. I saw a diver, deep sea diver. I saw that calm resolve where all you did was tell the truth.
Yeah.
All you did was speak scientific fact, and you didn't need to deviate. And so you didn't need to search for words or look around and say like KJP does, or, you knew what the answer was because the truth was right there in front of you.
So I had all the objective data right there in front of me.
Yeah. And it was awesome. So two things about it. One is, every question they asked you, and it's funny how that thing was supposed to be 10 minutes or 15 minutes and it wound up being over an hour.
Yeah.
But every question they asked you got progressively, I would say, more ridiculous.
Yeah.
So can you talk?
It got really ridiculous. It's so much so that the other people in the press outside of the White House press corps started criticizing the White House press corps for the ridiculous questions they were asking. I mean, there was some ridiculous stuff like, how much TV does he watch? Yeah, well, not his mother. I don't have any. What does that matter, right? I mean, we got
you don't have screen time on your phone for the president.
Yeah. We got a president right now that can barely find his way in and out of the White House, and they want to ask me how much TV President Trump. That's ridiculous, right?
Exactly.
Where are these same people asking the questions of his doctor?
It's a fact.
His doctor needs to be standing up in front of that podium answering these questions just like I did. For God's sake, if we ever needed a doctor to stand up and explain to us what's going on with the commander-in-chief, it's right now, right?
Yeah.
So, but, look, I mean, that was the day, I tell people, too, it led into this, the way they attacked me on the VA nomination. That was the day that I got the Trump stamp on me, right? Which I'm proud to have.
For sure.
I'm in a non-political job. I'm an active duty physician assigned to the White House in a non-political, apolitical job, someone who's worked for both Republicans and Democrats in the White House, right? Up there, giving the objective data, just the facts, right?
Yep.
But that was the day that I got the Trump stamp on me. They were so pissed because I didn't say he was unfit to be in office. I didn't tell him he had all these medical and, and cognitive issues. And they were also surprised by the fact that I did a cognitive test, right?
Yeah.
Which they were totally shocked by, right? And that President Trump aced it, right? He did extremely well on it. So when I walked out of there, like I said, I had the Trump stamp on me. Like I said, I'm proud to have, right? But when I walked out of there, that was the day that the press decided if they could ever cut my heart out, they were going to do it.
Yeah, right.
They were all committed to taking me down at the first opportunity that presented itself. And then fast forward a few months later, and I'm the VA nominee, and that's when the knives came in.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, I forgot to make that connection earlier, but I really wanted to. But I will tell you, every question they asked you, you could overlay video of President Biden now. And if there was any seriousness to whatever the illness was, or the lack of functioning,
right.
It applies to President Biden. So you could take every one of those questions, and after they answer the question, you can find a clip of Biden with those deficits, if you will, whether it's walking up the stairs, which, we've seen all those videos. Now he's got the short stairs, tripping on stage, versus President Trump saying, hey, can somebody help me down this ramp, which I asked people to help me down the ramp.
Yeah, right.
So just really, really crazy. Okay. I'm going to lighten it up just a touch here and talk about your flight experience today at iFly Virginia Beach.
Oh, man,
so
awesome.
you and your son came in, and we're going to roll some B-roll. We're going to roll some roll of it, especially that part of you making the door exit. But can you talk about that a little bit?
No, it's awesome, man. I mean, it's a great experience. If you haven't tried it out there, you need to come and experience it. It's so much fun, right? You're actually flying, right? It's cool. And there's a lot of skill involved in it, too. You don't just get in there. You got to, you move your body just a little bit one way or the other way, just a little bit wrong, and you don't do what you intended.
Yeah, right? Small movements have a big
impact, right? So if you see these people flying in these commercials and stuff, or you see people skydiving and they're doing all kinds of maneuvers and flipping around and, marrying up with each other and breaking away. I mean, that is like difficult to do. You got to be really good. So it's a lot. I mean, I'm going to come back and practice some more,
Oh, good.
I'll get better, but it was a fun time.
Yeah. Well, for your first time, and I see first time wind tunnel flyers all the time. You did great, and your son was in there with you, and that's one of the beautiful things is the family aspect. We see families in here every single day, and it's really, really cool. No, you picked it up real quick, and I thought that was great. Really, the last question, other than the 57 others that I've developed since we've been talking, but for this episode anyway, the last question is, what haven't I asked you? What do you want to share with listeners that you think I haven't covered?
Well, I mean, I know this may be not, intended to be really political. It's a leadership thing that you're doing and everything, and I appreciate that. But I want to reiterate to people that if you don't like what's happening in our country right now, you have the ability to change it, right? But you have to act, right? You can't sit back on the on the back bench and hope that somebody else is going to fix what's broken. We got a lot of things broken in our country right now, right? A lot of stuff is broken.
For sure.
And people have to get out. And they have to take an active role in this. You have to get out and you have to vote.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling you how to vote, but I'm telling you have to get out and vote, right? Yeah. And you have to, talk to people around you. Get other people that don't vote. Everybody should be voting, right? Everybody. So I would tell people look, I'm doing my part. I'm doing everything I can to fix what's broken. The future of our kids and our grandkids depend on what happens in this next election cycle. Maybe not everybody agrees with me in my political views, but I'm telling you right now, this is a pivotal time in history, right? It's a very pivotal time in history. And the path that this country takes and whether we maintain the strong republic that we've had for so long now is really going to depend on this. So I tell people, look, get out and be political, right? And get into this and figure out where you stand on the issues and talk to people about the issues and vote.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So border, economy, national security, three things that are broken, more broken than they ever have been in the past. And we have to vote to fix those things. So Ronny Jackson, Dr. Ronny Jackson, Congressman Ronny Jackson, Admiral Ronny Jackson, Doc Jackson, and Ronny, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you having me. Good time. And thanks for flying me today.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast. To contact Bob directly or to learn more about how Bob can advance you and your organization through leadership training, team building, executive coaching, and public speaking, visit robertpizzini.com. Robert, Pizzini.com, and connect with him on LinkedIn.